3 years had passed since Rebecca walked out of their small apartment, leaving behind nothing but a half-empty closet and a sleeping infant who would grow up asking why Mommy never came home. Lucas had built a new life from those broken pieces, learning to braid Rosie's hair from YouTube videos, mastering mac and cheese on weeknights, becoming both mother and father to a little girl who deserved so much more than his clumsy attempts at parenting. Christmas Eve had arrived with its usual chaos, and Lucas found himself rushing through the grocery store at 8 in the evening, grabbing last-minute ingredients for tomorrow's dinner, while Rosie clutched his hand. He was reaching for his worn leather wallet at checkout, when movement in his peripheral vision made him freeze. 2 lanes over, Rebecca stood beneath harsh fluorescent lights, designer coat draped elegantly over one arm, a basket of expensive wine and imported delicacies hanging from the other. She looked like she'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine, polished, successful, untouched by the chaos of single parenthood. Their eyes met across the distance, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Then, Rosie's small hand tugged his sleeve, and she whispered 2 words that shattered 3 years of carefully constructed distance. The shopping cart had a wobbly wheel that squeaked with every rotation, a sound Lucas had learned to tune out over the years. Rosie walked beside him, one hand gripping the metal side rail, while the other clutched a small, stuffed reindeer she'd insisted on bringing along. The grocery store was still busy at 8 in the evening on Christmas Eve, filled with other last-minute shoppers who'd forgotten cranberry sauce or needed extra butter for their holiday baking. Lucas navigated through the chaos with practiced efficiency, his mental checklist running through everything he needed for tomorrow's dinner. He'd been doing this alone for 3 years now. 3 years since the morning he woke up to find Rebecca's side of the bed cold, her closet half empty, and a note on the kitchen counter that said she couldn't do this anymore. This had been their life, their marriage, their 6-month-old daughter, the small town they'd settled in after college. She'd wanted more. She'd wanted the career in the city she'd given up when Rosie was born. She'd wanted the life she'd imagined for herself before diapers and sleepless nights had consumed everything. Lucas had read that note 17 times before Rosie's crying from the nursery pulled him back to reality. And in that moment, standing in their tiny kitchen, with his daughter's cries echoing through the apartment, he'd made a choice. He would be enough. He would learn to be both parents. He would figure it out. And somehow, he had. The first year had been survival mode, fumbling through diaper changes, Googling every tiny concern, calling his mother at 2 in the morning when Rosie's fever spiked. The second year had been about establishing routines, finding a rhythm that worked for just the 2 of them. By the 3rd year, they'd built something that felt almost normal. Lucas had become an expert at braiding hair, could recite every Disney movie by heart, and knew exactly how Rosie liked her sandwiches cut diagonal, never straight across. "Daddy, can we get the cookies with the snowmen on them?" Rosie's voice pulled him back to the present. She was pointing at a display of decorated sugar cookies, her eyes wide with hope. Lucas glanced at the price tag and did quick mental math. They were over budget already, but it was Christmas. "Sure, sweetheart. Grab a box." Rosie's face lit up, and she carefully selected a package, cradling it like treasure. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile her joy, over something as simple as holiday cookies. She placed them gently in the cart, then looked up at him with that expression she got sometimes, the one that made his heart clench. "Do you think Mommy likes snowman cookies?" she asked, her voice small. It was a question that came up periodically, in various forms. "Do you think Mommy likes purple? Do you think Mommy remembers my birthday? Do you think Mommy misses us?" Lucas had learned to navigate these questions carefully, never speaking badly of Rebecca, but also not building false hope. "I'm not sure, Rosie," he said softly, kneeling down to her level. "But I know you like them, and that's what matters for our Christmas." She nodded, seeming to accept this answer, and they continued through the store. Lucas grabbed a turkey breast more manageable than a whole bird for just the 2 of them, along with sweet potatoes, green beans, and ingredients for the pumpkin pie he'd promised to attempt. His mother had offered to host Christmas dinner, but Lucas had declined. He wanted to give Rosie a special day, just the two of them, in their own home. They made their way to the checkout lanes, and Lucas chose the shortest line. Rosie amused herself by organizing their items on the conveyor belt, arranging the cans by size with the concentration of a master architect. Lucas watched her with a smile, thinking about how much she'd grown, how her personality was emerging more every day, curious, kind, sometimes stubborn in ways that reminded him of himself. He was reaching for his wallet, mentally tallying the total one more time, when something in his peripheral vision caught his attention. A flash of auburn hair, a familiar tilt of a head. His hand froze halfway to his back pocket, and his breath caught in his throat. 2 lanes over, Rebecca stood with her back partially turned, examining items in her basket. But there was no mistaking her the way she stood, the line of her shoulders, the exact shade of her hair that he'd once run his fingers through countless times. She wore a camel-colored coat that probably cost more than his monthly rent, tailored perfectly to her frame. Her hair was shorter now, styled in a sleek cut that made her look older, more sophisticated. Even from a distance, Lucas could see she was wearing makeup carefully applied, not the minimal routine she'd done when they were together. In her basket, he glimpsed bottles of wine with labels he couldn't read from this distance, but knew were expensive based on the shape alone. Imported cheeses, gourmet crackers, the kind of items they used to walk past in the store, joking about who had money for $30 cheese. Apparently, Rebecca did now. The world seemed to narrow to just this moment, this space between checkout lanes. Time slowed down in that strange way it does during accidents or emergencies, every detail becoming hyper-aware. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a child was crying. The scanner at the register kept beeping rhythmically, and Lucas stood frozen, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything but stare at the woman who'd walked out of his life 3 years ago. Then, as if sensing his gaze, Rebecca turned. Their eyes met across the distance of 2 checkout lanes, and 3 years of silence. Her expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, recognition, something that might have been guilt or regret or fear. Her hand tightened on the basket handle, and she went very still. For several seconds, neither of them moved. They simply stared at each other across the mundane setting of a grocery store on Christmas Eve, the space between them filled with everything they'd never said, all the conversations they'd never had, all the explanations that had never come. Lucas felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Part of him wanted to turn away, to grab Rosie and run, to pretend he hadn't seen her. But he couldn't move, couldn't look away, couldn't do anything but stand there feeling like he was 22 again, watching her walk toward him across the college quad, thinking she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. "Daddy?" Rosie's voice broke through the moment. "Why did you stop?" Lucas tore his gaze away from Rebecca and looked down at his daughter. Rosie was watching him with concern, her small hand tugging at his sleeve. He tried to smile, tried to find words, but his throat felt tight. "I'm fine, sweetheart," he managed, though his voice came out rough. I thought I saw someone I knew." Rosie followed his gaze, looking across to where Rebecca stood. Rebecca was still frozen, still staring at them. No, not them. She was staring at Rosie. Her face had gone pale, and her lips were slightly parted as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. "Do you know that lady?" Rosie asked, tilting her head with innocent curiosity. Before Lucas could answer, Rebecca set down her basket and started walking toward them. Each step felt deliberate, measured, like she was fighting against her own instinct to run. Lucas's first impulse was to pull Rosie behind him, to protect her, though he wasn't sure what he was protecting her from. But he couldn't move. He could only watch as the woman he'd once promised forever to crossed the space between them. Rebecca stopped a few feet away, close enough to talk, but far enough to maintain distance. Up close, Lucas could see she looked tired despite the makeup, shadows under her eyes that concealer couldn't quite hide. But she also looked successful, pulled together in a way she never had when they were married. Her coat was definitely designer, her boots were leather. Even her bag looked expensive. "Lucas," she said, and hearing his name in her voice after 3 years felt like being punched in the chest. I didn't expect." "Neither did I," he said, and was surprised his voice worked at all. Rebecca's gaze dropped to Rosie, and something in her expression crumbled. "She's so big," she whispered. "She's so—" "Rosie?" Rosie pressed closer to Lucas's leg, suddenly shy in the way she got around strangers. Because that's what Rebecca was to her, now a stranger. She'd been 6 months old when Rebecca left. She had no memory of her mother beyond the stories Lucas had told, and the handful of photos he'd kept. "Rosie, this is—" Lucas started, then stopped. What was he supposed to say? "This is your mother who abandoned you? This is the woman who decided we weren't worth staying for? This is Rebecca." Hi, Rosie," Rebecca said, and her voice cracked on the name. She started to crouch down to Rosie's level, then seemed to think better of it, standing awkwardly instead. You're beautiful. You have your father's eyes." Rosie didn't respond, just clutched tighter to Lucas's pants leg. The silence stretched uncomfortably, filled only by the sounds of the busy store around them, other shoppers, the beeping of scanners, the tinny Christmas music playing through overhead speakers. "I should," Lucas started, gesturing vaguely toward their checkout lane. "We need to get home." "Wait," Rebecca said quickly, almost desperately. "Please, can we talk? Just for a few minutes?" Every instinct told Lucas to refuse, to take Rosie and leave, to maintain the distance and routine they'd built. But something in Rebecca's expression stopped him. There was a rawness there, a vulnerability that reminded him of the woman he'd fallen in love with before everything fell apart. "Rosie," he said gently, "why don't you help me finish putting our groceries on the belt?" They completed their transaction in tense silence, Rebecca hovering nearby like she was afraid they'd disappear if she looked away. Lucas paid with careful attention to his receipt, hyper-aware of Rebecca watching them, of Rosie's confusion, of the surreal nature of this entire encounter. When the last item was bagged, he took a breath and looked at Rebecca. "There's a coffee shop next door," she said before he could speak. "It's open late. Please, Lucas. I need to talk to you." He should say no. He should take Rosie home, put her to bed, maintain the boundaries he'd spent 3 years building. But standing here, looking at the woman he'd once loved, still loved, maybe, in some broken way he'd never quite healed from, he found himself nodding. 30 minutes, he said. Then we're leaving. The coffee shop was nearly empty, just a few other customers scattered at various tables. Lucas settled Rosie in a booth with her reindeer and a hot chocolate, then sat across from Rebecca at a nearby table where he could still see his daughter. Rebecca wrapped her hands around a cup of black coffee, not drinking, just holding it like she needed something to do with her hands. "I don't even know where to start," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You could start with why you're here," Lucas said, keeping his tone neutral despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "In this town, in that store, on Christmas Eve." Rebecca flinched at the edge in his voice. "I'm visiting my parents. They still live here, remember?" "I remember," Lucas said. "I remember a lot of things." She looked down at her coffee. "I deserve that. I deserve worse than that." "You deserve a lot worse than passive aggression in a coffee shop," Lucas said, then stopped himself, glancing at Rosie to make sure she wasn't listening. She was focused on her hot chocolate, carefully blowing on it like he'd taught her. "But that's not why we're here. What do you want, Rebecca?" "I want—" She trailed off, then started again. "I wanted to see my parents for Christmas. I didn't think I'd run into you. I didn't think—" She paused. "Actually, that's not true. I hoped I might see you. See her. I've been hoping that for months now." Lucas felt his jaw tighten. "You've had 3 years to reach out. 3 years of nothing. No calls, no letters, no child support, no birthday cards. Nothing. And now you just happen to show up?" "I know." Rebecca's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I know I have no right to be here. No right to ask anything from you. I signed away my parental rights. I walked away from both of you. I don't have any excuse that makes that okay." Then why are you here? Lucas asked, and despite his best efforts, the pain leaked through. Why now? Why tonight? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup like it held answers. When she spoke again, her voice was so soft, Lucas had to lean forward to hear her. Because I almost died, she said, and it made me realize what I'd thrown away. Lucas went very still. What? Last year, Rebecca continued, still not looking at him. I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Stage 2. It was. She took a shaky breath. It was the worst year of my life. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. I did it all alone in the city, in my perfect career that suddenly didn't seem to matter anymore. And every night, lying in that hospital bed or in my apartment feeling like death, all I could think about was you. Both of you. What I'd given up, what I'd lost. Lucas sat back, feeling like he'd been hit. Of all the explanations he'd imagined over the years for why Rebecca left, of all the scenarios he'd played out in his mind about what she was doing, this had never occurred to him. I'm in remission now, she said quickly. 6 months cancer-free. My doctors are optimistic, but it changed everything, made me see everything differently. I'd spent 3 years chasing this career, this life I thought I wanted, and none of it mattered when I thought I might die. None of it mattered compared to what I'd left behind. So you thought you'd just come back? Lucas said, his voice harder than he intended. Show up on Christmas Eve and what, expect us to welcome you with open arms? Expect Rosie to know who you are? She was 6 months old, Rebecca. She doesn't remember you. She doesn't know you. I know that, Rebecca said, and now the tears did fall, sliding down her carefully made-up face. I know I don't deserve anything from either of you. I needed to see her. See you. I needed to know that you were okay. We're fine, Lucas said flatly. We've been fine for 3 years. Have you? Rebecca looked up at him then. Really looked at him. Because you look exhausted, Lucas. You look like you've been running on empty for a long time. He wanted to deny it. Wanted to tell her they were perfect. That they didn't need her. That her leaving had been the best thing that ever happened to them. But the words stuck in his throat because part of what she said was true. He was exhausted. He'd been exhausted for 3 years, trying to be everything Rosie needed, trying to fill the space of 2 parents, trying to keep his own broken heart from bleeding out onto his daughter. That's not your concern anymore, he said instead. I know it's not, Rebecca said. I gave up that right. She wiped at her eyes, smudging her mascara. I'm not asking to come back into your lives. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance or anything I don't deserve. I just wanted to see her. See that she's happy and healthy and loved, and she clearly is. You've done an amazing job with her, Lucas. She's beautiful, and she seems happy, and that's because of you. Lucas glanced over at Rosie, who was making her reindeer drink from her hot chocolate cup, completely absorbed in her imaginary play. His heart swelled with love for her, this little person who'd become his entire world. She is happy, he said quietly. Most of the time, except when she asks about you, when she wants to know why her mommy doesn't visit like other kids' mommies do, when she sees other families and wonders what she did wrong to make you leave. Rebecca made a sound like a sob. She didn't do anything wrong. She was perfect. She is perfect. It was me. It was all me. I was selfish and scared, and I made the worst mistake of my life. Why didn't you come back? Lucas asked, and he hated the vulnerability in his own voice. If you realized it was a mistake, why didn't you come back sooner? Why wait 3 years? At first, I told myself you were better off without me, Rebecca said. That I'd only make things worse if I came back. Then, as time passed, it got harder and harder to imagine trying to explain, trying to make things right. And then I got sick, and I couldn't come back because I was barely surviving treatment. And then, she shrugged helplessly. Then I was in remission, and 3 years had passed, and I didn't know if I even had the right to try anymore. They sat in silence for a moment. Across the room, Rosie had finished her hot chocolate and was coloring on a napkin with a crayon the barista had given her. She looked so content, so peaceful in her own little world. Lucas thought about what Rebecca coming back would mean, the disruption to their routine, the confusion for Rosie, the reopening of wounds he'd spent 3 years trying to heal. But he also thought about all the times Rosie had asked about her mother, all the school events where other kids had both parents, all the nights she'd asked why Mommy didn't love her enough to stay. "I need to think about this," Lucas said finally. "I need to think about what's best for Rosie. Not for you, not for me, for her." "Of course," Rebecca said immediately. "Of course. That's all I want too. What's best for her? I'm going to take her home now." Lucas stood up, collecting their empty cups. "It's late, and she needs to get to bed for Christmas tomorrow." Rebecca stood too, looking like she wanted to say more but didn't know how. "Lucas, thank you. For sitting here with me. For not just walking away. I know I don't deserve even that much." He didn't respond, just walked over to collect Rosie. "Come on, sweetheart. Time to go home." Rosie hopped down from the booth, clutching her reindeer. As they headed toward the door, she tugged on Lucas's hand. "Daddy, who was that lady?" she asked, her voice carrying in the quiet coffee shop. Lucas froze. He glanced back at Rebecca, who had gone very pale, standing by their table with her hands pressed against her mouth. He looked down at his daughter's curious face, at those eyes that were indeed so much like his own, and he realized he couldn't lie to her. Not about this. "That's," he started, then had to stop and clear his throat. "That's an old friend, Rosie." But Rosie was staring past him now, staring at Rebecca with an expression Lucas couldn't quite read. Her little hand tightened in his, and she tilted her head in that way she did when she was thinking hard about something. Then, so quietly that at first Lucas thought he'd imagined it, Rosie whispered 2 words that made the entire world stop spinning. "She's Mommy." The words hung in the air between them, suspended in time. Lucas felt his heart stop, then start again with a painful thud. He looked down at Rosie, at her small face turned up toward him with an expression of dawning recognition. Then he looked at Rebecca, who had gone completely white, one hand pressed against her chest as if to hold her heart inside. "Rosie," Lucas started, his voice rough. "What did you say?" But Rosie wasn't looking at him anymore. She was staring at Rebecca with wide eyes, her grip on his hand loosening as she took a tentative step forward. "She's Mommy," she repeated, louder this time. "Like in the picture, in your wallet." Lucas's mind raced. The photograph. The one he kept tucked behind his driver's license, so faded and creased from the number of times he'd looked at it in those first desperate months. Rebecca holding newborn Rosie in the hospital, both of them looking at the camera with exhausted, radiant smiles. He'd thought about throwing it away 1,000 times, but never could. And Rosie had found it once, months ago, asking who the woman in the picture was. He'd told her the truth, that it was her mommy, taken a long time ago. He hadn't realized she'd memorized that face. Rebecca made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. She took a step toward them, then stopped herself, looking at Lucas as if asking permission. Tears were streaming down her face now, unchecked, and her hands were shaking. "Rosie," she whispered. You remember?" "I don't remember," Rosie said, with the blunt honesty of children. "But I know, from the picture." She looked up at Lucas, confused. "Why did you say she was a friend, Daddy? Why didn't you say she was Mommy?" Lucas knelt down to Rosie's level, his own hands shaking now. Because it's complicated, sweetheart. Because I left," Rebecca said, her voice breaking. She moved closer but kept her distance, respecting the space between them. "Because I wasn't a very good mommy, Rosie. I made a terrible mistake, and I left you and your daddy, and I haven't been here for you." Rosie processed this with the serious concentration she applied to everything. "Like when I left Mr. Whiskers at school and felt bad?" The comparison was so innocent, so childlike, that Lucas felt tears prick his own eyes. "Something like that," he said softly, "but much bigger." "Did you feel bad?" Rosie asked Rebecca directly. Rebecca dropped to her knees right there in the coffee shop, not caring about her expensive coat or the floor. "Every single day," she said, her voice raw with emotion. "Every single day since I left, I've felt bad. I've missed you so much, even though I never got to really know you. And I know that's my fault. I know I did something very, very wrong." Rosie was quiet for a moment, studying Rebecca with those thoughtful eyes. Then she said, "Are you going to leave again?" The question hit like a physical blow. Lucas saw Rebecca flinch, saw the pain and guilt wash over her face. But to her credit, she didn't look away from Rosie. She held his daughter's gaze and answered honestly. "I don't want to," she said. "But that's not really up to me. That's up to your daddy. And up to you, if you want me to stay." Rosie turned to look at Lucas, and he saw the question in her eyes. This was the moment he'd feared for 3 years, the moment Rosie would have to choose, would have to understand, would have to deal with the complicated reality of having a mother who'd left and might want to come back. "Rosie," he said gently, "this is a lot to think about. It's very late, and it's Christmas Eve, and I think we all need some time to figure out what happens next. Is that okay?" She nodded slowly, but her eyes kept darting between Lucas and Rebecca, like she was afraid one of them might disappear if she looked away too long. Rebecca stood up slowly, wiping at her face. "Lucas is right, Rosie. This is a lot, and it's late, but I want you to know." She paused, composing herself. "I want you to know that I think you're the most beautiful, amazing little girl I've ever seen, and I'm so sorry I haven't been here. And if your daddy says it's okay, I would really, really like to get to know you. If you want that too." Rosie looked at Lucas again, seeking guidance. He put his hand on her shoulder, trying to ground himself as much as her. "We're going to go home now," he said. "And we're going to sleep on this, and tomorrow we'll figure out what to do. Okay?" "Okay," Rosie said softly. Lucas stood, taking Rosie's hand. He looked at Rebecca, who was still crying silently, mascara running down her cheeks. Part of him wanted to comfort her, old instincts dying hard, but a bigger part was still reeling, still processing, still trying to protect his daughter from a hurt he wasn't sure how to prevent. "I'll call you," he said. "Tomorrow. At your parents' number, I assume it's still the same?" Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice. "Tomorrow," Lucas repeated, more to himself than to her. Then he led Rosie toward the door. They were almost outside when Rosie pulled free from his hand and ran back. Lucas's heart leaped into his throat, but Rosie didn't run to Rebecca. Instead, she stopped a few feet away and said, very seriously, "If you want to be my mommy, you have to promise not to leave again. That's the rule." Rebecca's face crumpled, and she nodded fiercely. "I promise," she whispered. "I promise, Rosie." Rosie seemed satisfied with this answer. She turned and ran back to Lucas, taking his hand again. They walked out into the cold Christmas Eve night, leaving Rebecca standing in the coffee shop, broken and hopeful and terrified all at once. The drive home was quiet. Rosie sat in her booster seat, clutching her reindeer and staring out the window at the houses decorated with Christmas lights. Lucas kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, trying to gauge what she was feeling, but her face was unreadable. "Daddy?" she said finally, as they turned onto their street. "Yes, sweetheart? Is Mommy going to come to our Christmas tomorrow?" The question was so direct, so innocent, that Lucas had to pull over before answering. He turned in his seat to look at her properly. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "Is that something you'd want?" Rosie thought about this seriously. "I think so," she said. "I always wanted to meet her, but—" She trailed off, chewing her lip in a way that meant she was thinking hard about something. "But what?" Lucas prompted gently. "But what if she leaves again? What if I like her and then she goes away?" Lucas felt his heart break all over again. He unbuckled his seatbelt and climbed into the back seat with her, pulling her into his arms. "That's a really good question, Rosie, and I don't have an answer for you. I don't know what's going to happen, but I promise you this no matter what. I will always be here. I will never leave you. Do you believe that?" She nodded against his chest. "I believe you. And if we let Mommy come back, we'll do it slowly. We'll make sure it's safe for your heart. We won't let her hurt you. Okay? Okay, Rosie said. Then, in a smaller voice, do you think she really missed us? Lucas thought about Rebecca's tears, the rawness in her voice, the way she'd looked at Rosie like she was seeing the sun for the first time. Yes, he said. I think she really did. They sat there for a few more minutes, Rosie warm and solid in his arms, before Lucas carried her inside. It was after 10 now, far past her bedtime, but he let her stay up a little longer while he made hot cocoa, and they sat on the couch together, her tucked under his arm. Daddy? She said sleepily. I'm glad you didn't leave too. Lucas kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. Me too, baby. Me too. He carried her up to bed eventually, helped her brush her teeth and change into pajamas. She was asleep before he finished reading her bedtime story, her breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of childhood sleep. Lucas sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, just watching her, thinking about everything that had happened tonight. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. Hope you and Rosie have a wonderful Christmas tomorrow. Love you both. He typed back. Thanks, Mom. Love you too. Something happened tonight. I'll call you tomorrow. Her response came immediately. Everything okay? I don't know yet, he typed. But we'll figure it out. He went downstairs and sat at the kitchen table, pulling out his wallet. The photograph was there, just as Rosie had said Rebecca in the hospital bed. Newborn Rosie wrapped in a pink blanket, both of them looking happy despite the exhaustion. He'd been the one behind the camera, still in scrubs from being in the delivery room, thinking he was the luckiest man in the world. 6 months later, that world had shattered. Lucas set the photo on the table and stared at it for a long time. He thought about Rebecca's confession about the cancer, about how close he'd come to never seeing her again, to Rosie never having the chance to know her mother. He thought about all the times Rosie had asked about Rebecca, about the hole in his daughter's life that he'd tried so hard to fill, but never quite could. He thought about forgiveness, about second chances, about what it meant to put his daughter's needs above his own pain. Around midnight, he made his decision. He pulled out his phone and composed a text to Rebecca's number. He still had it saved, had never been able to delete it. Tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Our address is the same. You can meet Rosie. Just meet her. We'll figure out the rest as we go. He stared at the message for 5 full minutes before hitting send. The response came back almost immediately. Thank you. Thank you so much. I won't let you down. I won't let her down. Lucas hoped that was true. He hoped it with everything he had. He went to bed but didn't sleep much, lying awake, listening to the house settle around him, thinking about tomorrow and all the tomorrows that might follow. At some point in the early morning hours, he heard Rosie get up to use the bathroom, heard her pause outside his door before padding back to her room. He wondered if she was sleeping any better than he was, if she was as nervous and hopeful and scared as he felt. Christmas morning arrived with weak winter sunlight filtering through the curtains. Lucas dragged himself out of bed, put on coffee, and started breakfast pancakes shaped like Christmas trees, Rosie's favorite. She came downstairs in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, and climbed onto a stool at the kitchen counter. Merry Christmas, sweetheart, Lucas said, kissing her forehead. Merry Christmas, Daddy. She watched him flip pancakes for a moment, then asked, Did you decide about Mommy? Lucas set down the spatula and turned to face her. I did. I called her last night. Well, I texted her. She's going to come over this afternoon, at 2 o'clock, just to visit, just to meet you properly. Is that okay with you? Rosie nodded, but he could see the nervousness in her eyes. What if I don't know what to say to her? You don't have to say anything you don't want to, Lucas assured her. You can just play or draw or do whatever you want. She just wants to see you, to spend a little time with you. There's no pressure, okay? Okay, Rosie said. But she didn't sound entirely convinced. They had a quiet Christmas morning. Rosie opened her presents a new art set, some books, a puzzle of the solar system she'd been wanting. She seemed distracted, though, not giving the gifts her usual enthusiastic attention. Lucas couldn't blame her. He felt distracted, too, watching the clock tick toward 2, wondering if he was making the right choice, if he was protecting Rosie, or setting her up for more pain. At 1:30, he had Rosie change out of her pajamas into regular clothes. She chose a red sweater with a reindeer on it and her favorite jeans. He brushed her hair, braiding it the way she liked, and she sat very still through the whole process, unusually quiet. "You okay?" he asked, finishing the braid. "I'm nervous," she admitted. "Me too," Lucas said. "But that's okay. Being nervous is okay." At 2 o'clock exactly, the doorbell rang. Lucas felt his heart jump into his throat. He looked at Rosie, who had gone very still on the couch. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, clutching her new reindeer stuffed animal, a Christmas gift that had already become a security blanket. Lucas opened the door. Rebecca stood on the porch, and she looked different than she had last night. No designer coat, no expensive clothes. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. Minimal makeup. She looked younger, more like the woman he'd married, and she was holding a small, wrapped package in trembling hands. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," Lucas replied. "Come in." Rebecca stepped inside, and Lucas closed the door behind her. The three of them stood in the small entryway for a moment, nobody quite sure what to do next. Then Rosie moved, walking slowly over to where Rebecca stood. "Hi, Rosie," Rebecca said, her voice gentle. "Thank you for letting me come visit." "Hi," Rosie said shyly. She looked at the wrapped package. "Is that for me?" "It is, if you want it," Rebecca said. "It's not much, just something I thought you might like." Rosie looked at Lucas, and he nodded permission. She took the package carefully and unwrapped it with the same concentration she applied to everything. Inside was a blank photo album and a set of colored markers. "I thought maybe we could make some memories together," Rebecca explained quietly. "If you want to. We could take pictures and you could decorate them however you like, but only if you want to." Rosie studied the album, running her fingers over the blank pages. "It's pretty," she said finally. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Another awkward silence fell. Lucas gestured toward the living room. "Why don't we sit down?" They settled in the living room, Lucas in his armchair, Rosie on the couch, Rebecca on the other end of the couch, with careful distance between herself and Rosie. For a few minutes, nobody spoke. Then Rosie said, very seriously, "I got an art set for Christmas. Do you like art?" "I do," Rebecca said. "I used to draw a lot when I was younger. Not very well, but I enjoyed it." "I like to draw," Rosie said. "Mostly animals. And space. I like space a lot." "Space is amazing," Rebecca agreed. "What's your favorite planet?" "Saturn, because of the rings," Rosie said, warming up slightly. "What's yours?" "I think. Maybe Jupiter? Because it has that big red storm that's been going for hundreds of years." They talked about planets for a while, the conversation stilted but genuine. Lucas watched them, seeing his daughter slowly relax, seeing Rebecca trying so hard not to push, not to overstep, to let Rosie lead. After about 20 minutes, Rosie said, "Do you want to see my room? I have glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back and smiled. "I would love that." Rosie led Rebecca upstairs, and Lucas followed at a distance, giving them space but staying close enough to intervene if needed. Rosie showed Rebecca her room with growing confidence, the star ceiling, her bookshelf, her art corner with all her supplies, the fish tank with her betta fish named Sparkles. Rebecca listened to everything, asked questions, praised Rosie's drawings, and didn't once reach out to touch or hug or push for physical affection. After the tour, they went back downstairs, and Rosie got out her new art supplies. "Do you want to draw with me?" she asked Rebecca. "I'd love to," Rebecca said. They spread out on the living room floor, Rosie with her new markers and Rebecca with some colored pencils. They drew in comfortable silence for a while, and Lucas made coffee, bringing Rebecca a cup the way she used to like it, cream, no sugar. She looked up when he handed it to her, surprise and gratitude in her eyes. "You remembered," she said softly. "Some things stick," he replied, not unkindly. As the afternoon wore on, Lucas watched something shift. Rosie's drawings became more animated, her conversation more natural. She showed Rebecca how to draw a unicorn. "You have to make the horn spiral, like this," explained her elaborate theory about aliens. "They probably have different colored skin, maybe purple or green," and demonstrated how Sparkles did a little dance when she fed him. Rebecca soaked it all in like she was dying of thirst and Rosie was water. She laughed at Rosie's jokes, admired her drawings with genuine enthusiasm, and answered her questions with careful honesty. When Rosie asked why she'd left, Rebecca said, "I was scared and confused and I made a terrible choice. I thought you and Daddy would be better without me, but I was wrong. I was very, very wrong." "But you came back," Rosie said. "I did," Rebecca agreed. "I came back because I realized that being your mommy was the most important thing I could ever be, and I'd thrown it away. And I know I have to earn the right to be in your life again. I know I can't just show up and expect you to love me or trust me, but I'm hoping, if you and your daddy will let me, that I can try." Rosie considered this seriously. "You have to promise again, not to leave." "I promise," Rebecca said, and her voice was fierce with conviction. "I promise, Rosie. I will never leave you again." Around 4:30, Rebecca said she should probably go. Rosie's face fell slightly, but she nodded. They walked to the door together, Rosie holding her new photo album. "Can you come back?" Rosie asked. "To visit again?" Rebecca looked at Lucas, hope and fear in her eyes. He took a breath and nodded. "How about next weekend?" he suggested. "Maybe we could go to the park if the weather's nice." "I would love that," Rebecca said. She looked at Rosie. "Would that be okay with you?" "Yes," Rosie said. Then, before Lucas could stop her, she stepped forward and gave Rebecca a quick hug. It was brief, awkward, but genuine. "Bye, Mommy," she said, testing out the word. Rebecca made a sound like a broken sob and hugged her back, careful not to hold on too long. "Bye, Rosie. Thank you for letting me visit. Thank you for giving me a chance." After Rebecca left, Rosie stood at the window watching her walk to her car. "Daddy?" she said quietly. "Yeah, sweetheart." I think maybe it's going to be okay." Lucas joined her at the window, putting his hand on her shoulder. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe it is." That night, after Rosie was asleep, Lucas sat in his kitchen again, this time with his phone in his hand. He composed a text to Rebecca. "Thank you for being patient with her today, for not pushing. It meant a lot." Her response came quickly. "Thank you for giving me this chance. I know I don't deserve it. I won't waste it, Lucas. I promise." He stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "We're not getting back together. You understand that, right? This is about Rosie, not us." "I understand," she replied. "I'm not asking for that. I'm just asking to be her mother, if she'll let me, if you'll let me." "Okay," he typed. "We'll figure it out. One day at a time." "One day at a time," she agreed. Lucas set down his phone and went upstairs to check on Rosie one more time before bed. She was sprawled across her mattress in that boneless way children sleep, her new reindeer tucked under one arm, and the photo album Rebecca had given her on her nightstand. The first page had a crayon drawing 3 stick figures holding hands. They weren't together in a group, but spaced out, each in their own space, but they were holding hands, connected despite the distance. Lucas stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at his daughter, and thinking about the strange, complicated future that was unfolding. He thought about Rebecca's cancer, about how close they'd all come to never having this chance. He thought about Rosie's questions over the years and how, for the first time, there might actually be answers. Most of all, he thought about forgiveness. Not the big, dramatic kind where everything is fixed and healed instantly, but the small, daily kind. The kind that meant choosing to move forward not because the past was erased, but because staying still hurt more. The kind that meant putting Rosie's needs above his own pain. The kind that meant being brave enough to risk being hurt again for the sake of his daughter's happiness. He walked over and kissed Rosie's forehead gently. She stirred slightly but didn't wake, just shifted closer to her stuffed animal. Lucas pulled her blanket up higher and turned on her nightlight, the one that projected stars on the ceiling, making her room look like the universe she loved so much. "Sweet dreams, baby," he whispered. He went to his own room but left both their doors open, the way he always did so he could hear if she needed him in the night. He lay in bed, exhausted but somehow more at peace than he'd felt in 3 years. Outside, snow was starting to fall again, covering their street in fresh white, like a blank page waiting to be filled. Lucas thought about tomorrow, and the day after that, and all the uncertain tomorrows stretching ahead. He thought about Rebecca learning to be a mother to the daughter she'd missed 3 years of. He thought about Rosie growing up with both parents in her life, in whatever shape that took. He thought about himself, learning to forgive, learning to let go of anger, learning to build something new from the broken pieces of what had been. It wouldn't be easy. There would be hard conversations ahead, boundaries to set, hurts to heal, trust to rebuild. Rebecca would have to prove herself, day after day, choice after choice. Rosie would have moments of anger and confusion as she got older and understood more fully what had happened. Lucas would have to work through his own feelings, his own pain, his own fear of being hurt again. But maybe, just maybe, they could do it. Maybe they could create a new kind of family, not the one they'd started with, not the one they'd imagined, but something real and honest and whole in its own imperfect way. Lucas closed his eyes and let himself imagine it. Rosie at her high school graduation with both parents there cheering for her. Sunday visits that became routine. Holiday dinners where they'd learned to laugh together again, differently than before but genuinely. A future where Rosie knew beyond doubt that she was loved, that she was worth staying for, that her mother's leaving had been about Rebecca's own struggles and not about Rosie's worthiness of love. As he drifted toward sleep, Lucas's last conscious thought was a prayer of sorts, not to any particular god, but to the universe, to time, to whatever force governed second chances. Please, he thought, please let this work. Please let her stay. Please let Rosie's heart stay safe. Please give me the strength to forgive. Please help us figure this out. In her room down the hall, Rosie slept peacefully, dreaming of stars and planets and, perhaps, of the mother who'd come back just in time for Christmas. On her nightstand, the photo album waited for its pages to be filled with new memories, new beginnings, new chances at the love that had been lost and was now, tentatively, being found again. And in a house across town, Rebecca lay awake in her childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling and whispering her own prayers. "Thank you," she thought. "Thank you for another chance. I won't waste it. I won't leave again. I'll prove it, day after day, until they believe me, until I believe myself." The snow continued to fall throughout the night, blanketing the town in quiet white. And in 3 houses, Lucas's, Rosie's grandmother's, where Rebecca stayed, and the small apartment where Lucas's mother worried and hoped 3 people tried to sleep, all of them thinking about the same thing, the fragile, terrifying, beautiful possibility of starting over. Sometimes forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's not a dramatic gesture or a tearful declaration. Sometimes it's just the quiet decision to keep showing up, to keep trying, to keep believing that people can change, that love can survive even the deepest wounds, that family can be rebuilt even after it's been shattered. Sometimes forgiveness is as simple and as complicated as saying yes when your 6-year-old daughter asks if her mother can visit again, as opening your door to the person who hurt you most because your child deserves that chance, as choosing hope over bitterness, possibility over pain, love over anger. As Lucas finally drifted into sleep in the early hours of the morning after Christmas, he understood something he hadn't before. Forgiveness wasn't about Rebecca. It wasn't even really about Rosie, though she was the catalyst for it. Forgiveness was about him. It was about choosing to live without the weight of anger. It was about freeing himself from the prison of resentment. It was about deciding that he deserved peace as much as anyone else. The road ahead would be long and uncertain. There would be setbacks and struggles. But for the first time in 3 years, Lucas felt something he'd almost forgotten. Hope. Not the naive hope of a young man in love, but the harder-won hope of someone who'd survived the worst and was still standing. The hope that came from choosing to try, to risk, to believe that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. The house settled into silence, snow muffling the world outside. Inside, a father and daughter slept, dreaming separate dreams that were just beginning to intertwine with a third. A mother learning to find her way back home, one small step at a time. Christmas was over, but something else was just beginning.